Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, children of all ages, people around the world. Welcome to the Criticality podcast put on by Secure Nation. I am Chip Harris and our lovely.
Yeah, so I just was looking at the clock and I thought, oh, we're going on soon. So
Oh,
it's one of those days because we have a different guest now. So, but he's a really cool guy, so I'm looking forward to meeting him.
yeah,
Risk
I am too. I
the
am too.
Risk Wrangler, Chris Patterson.
Yes, I know, and I'm kind of like interested in like what he's been up to because I've been dealing with risk all day today because Microsoft came out with 63 patches on Patch Tuesday. And, I've been working with the part of the security team always likes to work with the risk management team, and it's like kind of going, okay, what can we reboot? Can we not reboot? And it's been one of those things where we've been pushing out patches, and rebooting systems, and some of them coming back up, and then some of them have not been coming back up. So, yeah, fun times every day after Patch Tuesday, turns into Vulnerability Wednesday, so that's the
How
running.
how often has a Patch Tuesday patch had a critical vuln in it and you've regretted it?
Oh God, I can't count the times. I mean, it's Microsoft. First off, Linux systems not so are not as bad, because you're not really changing every. Sometimes you have to reboot, sometimes you don't, but the changes are instantaneous. Microsoft stuff, you got to reboot. It's got to dump the cache. It's got to go through its whole Active Directory tree again, and it's got to repopulate, and takes a little bit of time. So it's like, all right, how long is this going to take? And it's sometimes you got to isolate those systems, sometimes you don't. If you're a good system administrator, you want to really make sure you got a backup. If it's a virtual machine, you want to make sure you got a really good snap of it before you start pushing updates. So it's like, it's been kind of stressful this morning. But also, if I sneeze glitter, I'll let you know why. I was doing some airbrushing last night here in my office, which is also my studio. So I've been working on a friend's fenders and gas tanks for his Harley, and he wanted this silver flake, put onto his, fenders and his gas tank that I've been airbrushing. So if I sneeze glitter, you know what it is. Happy holidays.
Oh, there you go. So wow, these are tumultuous times and fully expect things to. I know people groan when I talk about astrology, but a Mercury retrograde did start a few days ago. So if anything is unpredictable, if there are miscommunications, if people don't understand what you're saying, if plans get canceled, that's Mercury appearing to go backwards. And that's going to continue till November 19th. So
That's pretty
double
cool.
check everything, everyone.
And I saw that NASA's been tracking, the weird asteroid thing that they don't even know what it is that's doing all this kind of cool stuff. Maybe it's an alien mothership. Maybe our alien overlords are about to show up and take over the world, which I think is pretty cool that they've, used the James Webb telescope to take a look at this weird looking, astrological, asteroid or whatever it may be. And then the Hubble took a picture of it. And now, you got NASA that's on standby because it's coming, and they've had an alert, because it's getting pretty close to Earth. And it's kind of weird making this weird slingshot kind of maneuver where it uses the Earth's gravity to kind of shoot out. And they're like, yeah, it's getting pretty close. I'm like, well, how close is close? I mean, I've seen, Deep Impact, I've seen Armageddon, I've seen all these, Hollywood movies where they show asteroids, hitting things. And I watch a lot of documentaries, and they like in Russia, back in the day was a huge meteor impact. There's been meteor impacts that hit our Earth, and there's a lot of, fragments of small meteors that hit, our planet all the time. But something like that's pretty big. I mean, it's like the size of like Manhattan. It's huge, like Rhode Island size.
So
And
if
I'm
it
like,
does end up moving toward the Earth, which is very, very scary, by the way,
yeah,
uh, is NASA going to do the whole Team America World Police thing that the South Park creators did 20 years ago? Where it's like, America, fuck
fuck
yeah.
yeah.
A massive Statue of Liberty shaped torpedo toward it or something.
I don't know. I mean, that's one of those things as a cybersecurity guy, you're kind of like going, okay, as long as it doesn't affect the electromagnetic field, or have a solar flare that knocks out satellites and, communications. But I mean, I think it's still pretty interesting to kind of see the stuff that kind of goes through Facebook and LinkedIn. They're talking about, this huge meteor that, some people say it's not a meteor, and then some people say, yeah, it's a meteor, and then some saying it's a weird because it's venting, gases that normally are not vented out by a normal comet, or an asteroid. So who knows? I'm like, okay, if it is, I know what they'll do. They'll shoot every nuclear weapon they possibly could at it, to basically make it go like, like like if you're playing pool, it hits another ball, and goes ping, and goes away, or they blow it up completely. But you never know. You never know.
In completely unrelated news, in EU Parliament, they are again discussing chat control and making it legally necessary to put law enforcement backdoors and encryption again, which is a threat that, people like Bruce Schneier have been fighting for decades now in various
Yeah,
ways.
I'm all against that because that's the most stupidest thing you would ever do. Why would you introduce a vulnerability into your system,
Yeah.
or your program?
Yeah.
Knowing it's just a matter of time for somebody figures it out. I mean, it's like, but and that goes against everything that we teach about secure coding practices, right? It's like this reason why we do bug bounty programs, the reason why we do some of these things, yeah, and Secure Nation, which is our wonderful sponsor, they help sell cybersecurity software, to individuals and to companies, into states and whatnot. Why would you sell something knowing it's defective?
It's bizarre. It's a bizarre change in direction and culture because like the EU had such a great reputation for what they did
Yeah.
with GDPR. Like the GDPR really made the EU look good, and now they're like a lot of EU countries like Germany has been against it and various other, but not all. Some European countries support the idea. So
you know, this I wouldn't say we can't even fix password issues. Okay, we've been doing this 30 years roughly, with computers in the world, and it tickles me to death. It's like, okay, we're gonna introduce backdoors into systems and blah 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 blah, but we're not going to fix password issues. We're not going to fix Active Directory issues. I mean, like, look at this. I mean, Microsoft just I mean, Microsoft.
Louvre was the password to the Louvre security camera Wi-Fi.
Oh yeah, and then what did they do? They stole a whole bunch of jewelry, really expensive jewelry.
Their
And like,
password was Louvre, Louvre. Like it boggles my mind.
yeah, you ain't the only one. I mean, it's the same thing, and I say this also too about, it's the reason why we patch, and the reason why we do vulnerability, and the reason why we do threat assessments is because we want the safety and the security of the user to be able to use their computer without them thinking about this stuff. And that's our job. That's been our job for what, a bazillion years, since computers have been around, is to make sure that the users just blindly do their job and don't have to worry about the back end services. Same thing in critical infrastructure. When you flip the switch, we want the power to come on, right?
Yeah, blaming the end user for cyber attacks is a fool's errand.
Yeah, it's just don't blame the user sometimes, because I mean sometimes it is the back end services, and you're like, bleh. I mean, what are we going to do? I mean, and sometimes we're at the behest of the vendor because maybe the vendor doesn't have a patch, for the vulnerability. So we got to isolate the system, So there's other things that you can do to, to kind of stop some of these things. And I've been doing a lot of research for I'm writing another book, I had a lot of great responses from the first book. And, shameless plug here, I started doing research for the next one. I started looking at like, when did we really start seeing major critical infrastructure problems in the United States? I didn't look at Canada, didn't look at Mexico. Really, it started back, in 2000 and 2003 is when we really started seeing when the internet started becoming more usable and more accessible to more people, is when we started seeing all these vulnerabilities. And some of the research that I pulled, I mean, it was just like when I worked in pharmaceuticals. It's like going, okay, you know, in healthcare, same thing. Is like, what do we need to do to be able to improve our systems based on longevity of time? Because some of these systems we don't want to patch, we don't want to update, we don't want to do these things. We want to make sure that that X-ray machine is isolated. Nobody's touching it. It's not touching the outside world. Yeah, we need to monitor it. So, we're going to put it on the internet, but we're going to put it on a closed, network, very tight IP structure, because we don't want some hacker to get in there and raise the rads up and irradiate somebody to death, right? That's horrible. I mean, it's a horrible way to die. So we don't want anything like that to happen. Plus, the lawsuits that are on top of that, probably from the family members that would sue, would be pretty bad. So, you know what? The fix is cheaper than the result, the end result. So let's just go ahead and fix it now, because you pay me now, you pay me later, still got to fucking pay me. So that's been my rule for years. And I
And
say that on meetings, but yeah.
And someone else who understands that really, really well is the Risk Wrangler, and we've got him
Yeah.
here. But I hope I don't insult him when I tell him that his riskwrangler.com website has a bad TLS certificate. We're having him
Probably
on,
not.
and I'm already giving you a
Probably,
bug report.
probably not a shock. I haven't gone back to update that, and it's on probably some old hosting platform. So, thanks for that, Kim.
No, no,
I'm
no
gonna go.
problem.
I'll have a look.
Now I have multiple domains of my own that I'm monitoring, so it's happening to me sometimes when the certificates expire, and it's annoying.
Oh yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, we're
Once
we're getting
once
we're getting
once
we're
I
getting
rejoin the corporate world, I need to go back and kind of check that online presence. So that's awesome.
I'm part of the corporate world, and guess what? We're just starting to pay like the yearly renewal for CALs and Office 365 just hit us and everything. And I said, okay. Now I told this to the security team and the red team, and I said, like, if you really want to have a field day, just go scan for open file shares one day. And just see what's being shared between everybody and watch the nightmare fuel and the meetings begin. And they did that, and they were like going, "Oh my god, this is such a huge risk." And we're like, "Yeah, because you're sharing with SharePoint and all this stuff out that you're not supposed to." Or, and better yet, you probably don't even know what you're sharing. Period. And then OneDrive made it a lot worse, and it was like going, "Oh,
I don't
face, face plant."
I switched to all Linux everything, and I do not miss OneDrive being force fed into everything. I think I've cut off a major attack vector there. I recommend everyone drop his. I recommend that people use Linux as much as possible. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, the challenge you run into in the large corporations, and we've seen this too, is it ties into they need these channels to collaborate now, right? And so in our world, it could be different researchers, different domains. So we do have to police it on an exception basis. Chip, we also did just recently, start to lock out some of the other file shares. But really the biggest risk we've seen out there in the latest threat is now that the kind of email gateways and protected links and all this have kicked in around phishing. The
Mm-hmm.
adversaries have really switched their focus to Microsoft Teams, and probably the biggest threat we've seen emerging now is if they can get a hold of a legit Teams account on their side and send an invite to a known email
Correct.
within your organization, then they can start to play the old, "Hey, I'm your help desk. Please connect and click this link." So the phishing is moved. I don't know what we're going to call it, tishing or something, but now it's definitely coming through the Teams channel. And it started probably back this summer a little bit, but that is, and even my discussions with other professionals, it's picked up quite a bit here this fall, and probably we're headed right into the winter, and all the click here to track your package is coming next, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, it's just a matter
So,
of time.
so you are a GRC expert, which is a very, very important area of expertise. I think is overlooked way too much in our industry because so many people want to be pen testers, and not
Yes.
enough people want to be GRC specialists.
Yeah,
Um,
it's I tell that to especially folks that are looking. We have so many professionals who are like, how do I break in? And
Right.
I worked for years with FedEx as part of the InfoSec team there, but also very closely with the audit teams. And the great career path for a lot of the FedEx InfoSec team that's still there today, go back 10 years. A lot of those guys were systems auditors on our audit team, right? So they knew where the skeletons were buried. They knew kind of where the vulnerabilities were. They had to do the risk assessments. So it wasn't hard for them to make that transition over into the information security team. So for a lot of the folks that are out there looking for how do I break in or maybe re-enter um, the industry, because I know a lot of folks are still looking for, hey, where's my next opportunity or what's the new career path? That internal audit, that side of GRC can pull you in very quickly, and it's an exciting time right now. So a lot of emerging things from AI, really just changing the way we're doing GRC in general and being more efficient because a lot of it's very manual and tedious. That's changing a lot with the new modeling out there. So you're 100% right there, Kim. It's a great kind of sub-segment, and then what's to say you can't pivot if you want to go work on the SOC later. Or, let your manager know, hey, as soon as that next opening comes, I want to switch over and move into that side of the world.
Yeah,
I
and I was working with the NIH and the CDC doing risk vulnerability, and management and whatnot, and it was unreal, because coming from working in healthcare, working with hospitals as a pen tester and a cybersecurity guy, and they're like, "Wow, you actually, just like know a lot about medical. Can you help us with, dealing with and I worked for an Australian company. They were into bloodborne pathogens testing, and they did all the little pink pastry dishes. They would test blood and stuff like that. And they were in the greater Memphis area. But we worked between Memphis and Australia, and we had to follow the Australian cybersecurity rules versus the U.S. rules, which were way more stricter. When it came
Yeah.
down to protecting client data, HIPAA compliance, and I already knew all that stuff. So it was a very easy transition for me. And they're like, well, you need to get some certifications for this. And I was like, well, okay, what do I need to do? And there was no real answer. I had to kind of go out there and find it out on my own. But I really worked with the risk management team, and I tell this to students like, risk management, vulnerability management, when you're dealing with compliance and regulation, that's never going to go away. Some of it's federally mandated, some of it's states mandated, some of it's country mandated, like or the nation thereof or continent of says that you must follow ABC rules. So, how to apply those things to cybersecurity, very interesting. And I know because I'm on the job hunt myself because my job goes away in January, and I out of 973 resumes that I've sent out, I've only gotten asked that one time, like, what do you know about compliance and regulation? And I'm like, what do you want to know? I've dealt with it for years, so it's been
Well,
very interesting.
they may be throwing you the EU may be throwing you a line here soon. The biggest I did risk quantification for my current organization, and we went through and I used cyber risk quantification approach. And my CISO was quite shocked when I came back to him. I said, "Your biggest threat actor is a regulator," and he's like, "Not this threat group or that threat group." He's like, "No, it's the EU. That's your biggest threat actor." And he's like, "Why is that?" I said, "Well, I started digging into the new NIS2 regulation in Europe that's tied to resiliency and cybersecurity,
Mm,
and it's expensive as GDPR. It's 2% of global revenue as a maximum fine, and
wow.
even stricter that they can shut down operations, they can penalize officers. So as strict as GDPR was in the privacy arena, NIS2 is now in the cyber resiliency area. So it is, if you look at when you start putting risks up against like 2% of our global revenue versus we get popped at one facility, that's going to be painful and it's going to stink. But 2%, it's probably not going to be 2% of global revenue. So when you're looking to focus your efforts as an organization, that's why I typically get away from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 risk ratings
Hmm.
and treat it more like trying to self-insure and using cyber risk quantification to look at where our biggest risks are. But that's the biggest one. If you have companies that are in European operations, especially in Belgium and France, and they are not currently registered, they are already out of compliance. Germany and France should be ratifying
Wow.
their laws just here before the end of the year. So you have to get your registrations in, and you're going to love this. You have to notify them within 24 hours of a severe incident.
Whoa.
And if you do not
I'm sorry,
if you
I'm
do
going to
not
brag a
notify
little
them,
bit, but my
if you do
big
not
project,
notify them, you're out of compliance immediately, right? And here come the fines.
Oh,
my big project last year was I was working with a think tank founded by Siemens called, I think it's called Digital Industries World. And I wrote a guide to NIS2 compliance and compliance with a bunch of ISO standards and whatnot. And there's all these new European industrial cybersecurity regulations. And basically, that book is a guide to it. And you can actually buy it on Amazon. And when I was writing it, honestly, I didn't think they would sell it on Amazon. I thought that there would be like an internal thing, but
It's probably going to pick up here, especially how to practically address these things. The guidance that they're auditing against, if people are interested, you should Google ENISA. So Anicia, that actually has the technical implementation guide and what they're going to be auditing against. So a lot of folks have been CPAT. Why haven't you been at events? Why haven't you been out on the road? Where you used to be everywhere and doing briefings and such. And it's been heads down on this because there's a lot of work to do. There's some 22 different sections and lots of subsections to this, and it's going to be a challenge for folks with European operations. It's got
well,
a whole purchasing side to it. It's got a whole HR side to it. It's deep.
I am not surprised by that because I mean I deal with trains, planes, and automobiles, so I deal with infrastructure, and I
Yep.
deal with IT, and I deal with OT. So, and I've been doing this now forever, it seems like. I actually celebrated my work anniversary. I've been doing this now 28 years. So basically my entire adult life career has been doing this. And it's, especially in transportation, things are getting a lot more there's a lot more laws and regulations that are coming out that we've never seen before. Especially around trains, especially around maritime, because maritime is actually changing. And I didn't realize how old maritime was until we had the horrible, bridge collapse in Baltimore. We were looking at laws that go back to the 1750s, and we're looking at laws, for rights of trade and ingress. I mean, all this stuff, and it's like 1700, 1800 laws. They're between like, the British Empire when it was called that versus, the United States of America versus, Indochina, which I'm like going Indochina. I haven't heard that term in a long time since history class. And like, yeah, some of this stuff goes back to the 15, 16, 17, 1800s for maritime, and the risk regulations and stuff like that don't exist for some of this stuff. So, a lot of this is now coming into play. It's like going, wow, we should have risk management for barges, risk management, and critical infrastructure, testing for bridges, and that seems to have kind of fallen by the wayside, for the longest period of time. Well, pay me now, pay me later. Still got to fucking pay me. So guess what? Now that's coming into fruition. I'm starting to see, at least this year, I'm starting to see it hit really, really hard because I mean, we have Cpat that's now being pushed across all the ports, and the other thing though too is a lot of these ports now are becoming more automated, like the port of Los Angeles, to where you've got more automation, and you've got more, AI analytics that's being used, because you have robots that are picking up, these 53-foot containers on sleds and taking them to the field to where they need to be deposited, and China has been doing this for 15 years. And now we're finally playing, that wonderful, US condiment that we love called ketchup, to put on our fries to eat because we're catching up, to what the world's been doing. So I would kind of like your take on that, sir.
Yeah, there's that's part of NIS2 is it actually elevates you to what they call essential if you're critical infrastructure. So
Mm-hmm.
that does start to bring a much higher level of compliance to it. And within that regulation as well, what you're bringing up is the supply chain infrastructure, right? So they are starting to dig into, and I was just on a review with one of our clients the other day, and they were asking deeper questions, not just around cyber, but obviously around supplies of certain things that may be made in countries that have political unrest right now. So, we've talked for years about this convergence of both the physical and cyber arenas, and we're starting to focus on that at our organization right now because it's getting harder and harder to separate the two, and especially if the regulators are coming in, looking at both of those dimensions. When I was at FedEx, it is funny that a lot of brokerage law, if you start, like you're saying, track it back, it almost has origins in like pirates and ships for hire kind of thing, where it's like, hey, if you take possession of my goods, this is what the
Yeah.
warranty is, and all that is you're right, it is very old.
Yeah,
But
and one that I found was like once it leaves the dock, who's responsible for it? Is it the
yep,
transport carrier? Is
it
it
is you.
the
It is once you sign it over, and that's what a lot of people that didn't know. Like working at FedEx for so long, they didn't realize we could open up those packages if we had to, because it was technically in our possession, right? Where the postal service and the government services are a little bit different and are held by different standards and laws. So rights of carriage and all those things they go all the way back to old school ships, even though your shipment may be traveling on a plane or on a truck or something else.
Mhm.
So it is funny.
So, Chris, I want your opinion about this because you're GRC and you probably know about all kinds of data privacy regulations all around the world. My gut, now that I've written so much about data privacy regulations over the years, is most of the rest of the world has better data privacy regulations than Canada and the United States, especially the EU. The United States' data privacy laws generally suck, in my opinion.
they do?
And Canada's are even worse. Canada's Cpat, which is our most like generalized data privacy legislation, is absolutely pathetic. It says stuff like if an organization discovers a data breach, please report it in a timely fashion. No definition for a timely fashion.
Yep. Singapore's pretty rigid as well. The this is good for me and people in the GRC industry is that unfortunately, the United States hasn't addressed this at a federal level, right? So the way the EU uh, did GDPR and the way they're doing NIS2 is they kind of set that main directive and that main set of standards at the kind of national level, we'll call it, or regional level for the
Mm.
EU, and then each of the states can tweak it, or each of the countries within the EU can tweak it and change it as they need. But the core guidance is provided by the EU, and we do not have anything like that. So,
Right.
California privacy law is vastly different than what you're going to see in New York. There's some similarities, so we love that in the GRC world because it's just another framework we have to map and manage to. But you're right in the way they're structured and written. But you don't get away from it, Kim. I mean, it's like what we do in the whole legal practice. I remember working with FedEx on some other issues that were tied into certain legal regulations, and they will typically just go with the most strict law or regulation that's out there, typically California, and then map that across the entire organization. So there
CCPA.
were yeah. But so for states, like if you were in transportation law, there were certain things I'd be like, we don't have to do this in Tennessee because the regulation says X or Y, and then they'd be like, it would be too hard for us to manage the Tennessee transportation law versus Georgia versus whatever. We're just going to go with California. It's more rigorous. If we meet that, then we meet everything else. So that's typically how you'll see these controls designed and
Mhm.
how organizations will manage it. They will go towards like what you're saying. If the EU, if Singapore, if you're especially doing things internationally, are the most strict, they will typically write their controls and manage to that. Then you're compliant. And then if they upgrade CCPA or one of these other regulations, then hey, we've already got that covered because we're already going to the higher standard. It does, however, get a little bit into if some of these and we're seeing this, Chip, you're bringing up the OT environments, right? If you only have one facility in a particular jurisdiction and that regulation is extremely stringent, then maybe you are only going to do that for that one jurisdiction. Again, makes it more complex on GRC teams, but from the perspective of tracking, managing to it, making
Mhm.
sure those teams are doing their self-assessments and the work that needs to be done there. That's typically how we manage through it, and why we've seen kind of the expansion of governance risk and compliance tools. Really, I tell folks that when I got into this area back in 2007, 2008, there may have been 5 or 6 governance risk and compliance players, and now like there are literally dozens, if not hundreds, because you've got everything from something that's going to track an OFAC violation to
Right.
something that's going to track pharmaceutical documentation and making sure that's
Right.
well documented in case you get an FDA type audit, and then you'll have continuous control monitoring. You'll have things that are using language models to do regulatory compliance through natural language processing. So there's probably, and then you have tools fit for smaller organizations that will scale up, and others that cover the enterprise. So where there used to be just a few players, there are dozens now, and it does make the role of a GRC lead to be a little bit more difficult because you have to really understand, when you're bringing tooling in to assist with some of these things because of the complexity. What are you really getting into at any given
Do
point?
you have any
Right.
theories as to why California has legislation that copies the GDPR and the other states don't? Is it Silicon Valley or?
No, I think it's just the nature of California law. It tends to favor the consumer. It's a bit stricter. From that perspective, it's almost cultural, right? But it was easier, right? If GDPR is kind of the standard that's out there, the more you can kind of just adopt from them. It makes it easier if
Mhm.
they, similar to what I was saying, just stay aligned with that regulation. It technically makes it easier, on those organizations to stay compliant if you're kind of just dealing with two very aligned standards and something that's completely, and radically different. Which this NIS2 is deeper than I've seen, and I actually made the comment in one of our meetings we were going through it. I was literally shocked by the depth it went to in some cases, deeper than things I've seen in the past.
But given the EU's track record of having like great data privacy legislation and whatnot, do you have any strong feelings about them now considering chat control and putting like encryption backdoors into things for law enforcement? Does that
Yeah,
surprise you, disappoint you?
yeah. I mean, I heard you mention that as we were coming on. I had not read that they were trying to push that again. It always gets into a little bit of that surveillance state, and where is that line? And we shouldn't fool ourselves, right? We know from Eternal Blue and the things that happened, through the
Oh,
shadow brokers disclosure, that those were
yeah.
back doors that were used by the agencies anyway. They just got exposed. And you were asking about one time, anytime you had a Microsoft patch you didn't apply that was catastrophic. That was one. That was one for sure. Because
Yes.
the WannaCry and not Petya
Spectre.
Eternal Blue hack. It was they released that patch about I think a month or two before the actual attack started happening. So I
Yeah.
remember May 2017 very well, unfortunately,
Yeah.
for the
I,
wrong
I
reasons.
I remember for all the wrong reasons too, and I agree with you. I mean, I am, especially because I've worked in the nuclear industry, especially transport of nuclear materials. It is highly regulated, and the laws are very specific, and most of those are written, um, towards the transport of certain things, and materials and goods. That being, because FedEx, is an example, and UPS and DHL and all of them, that I've ever worked with, as an investigator, they ship, ammunition, they ship, nuclear materials for radiology machines, organs. That was, they ship, all kinds of stuff.
Which
So,
brings them under another difficult regulation,
difficult,
which is
yeah,
CMMC, right? So now, if you're
yeah,
bidding on defense contracts, that may be even more strict than NIS2. That's another good one that's
yeah.
very very intense and has teeth to it, right? You could lose, FedEx contract to do work for the military's got to be, in the billions, I would guess.
Yep.
And if they're not
And
compliant with CMMC, they can't bid on that contract anymore. So that was when Katie Arrington put that in, right? It was like, let's try to do this with a carrot versus a stick, right? And that was what they said is if you just, the carrot is get your CMMC certification or you can't bid, right? So that's a
that was, yeah,
very,
one of them.
very different approach.
Yeah. And it was one of those things where it's like, yeah, you got to go through the certification to make sure that first off you're liable, because it was liability reasons from a legal standpoint, And to Kim, to answer part of your question, California doesn't have what they call right to hire laws like we do in the South, because some states here in the United States have what they call the right to hire, right to fire law. So in other words, they don't have to tell you the reason why they're letting you go. They just let you go, for labor reasons, because it's one way, that some of the states keep unions, out of their state, is because they have these laws enacted. So California, which is union friendly, don't have that. So in other words, if you're being terminated, or they're, for whatever reason, or being promoted or whatever, they have to tell you the reasons why. In other words, human resources has to tell you, going, this is the reason why you're being promoted, demoted, laid off, whatnot. And then this is the reason why, because they give you more chances to file for different types of unemployment, that are actually existing, in the United States. Because there are different types of unemployment. Like, there's generalized, there's specific, and so forth. Like if you're disabled, or a veteran, you get more different benefits, depending on which state that you live in, and depending on how much they actually regulate out for those terms and conditions that apply. So there you go. It's just one of those things you never really kind of think of until it's like, wow. And in the United States right now, we still have a lot of people that are furloughed, from the government shutdown. And the law state, hey, congratulations, you're going to get 70% of your pay relatively quick. The rest of it's going to be coming out, over the next couple paychecks. But as I've told people before, considering, I deal with, the state of New York and New Jersey, guess what? When they say, "Oh, the government's back on," woo, everybody thinks it's going to turn on like within 24 hours. I'm like, no, 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 no. There's a 2 to 3 week spin up that you got to think about, in labor, that you have to bring back on, including those people getting back into those seats, getting those systems, turned back on, getting, rotating schedules, for people to start taking, and who does it affect? It affects travel, trains, planes, automobiles, everything, because a lot of people now are like, screw it, I'm not going to fly, I'm going to drive, you know. Yeah, if I have to drive 4 or 5 hours, or 8 to 10 hours, I'd much rather do that than sit in an airport for 8 to 10 hours, to get a connecting flight. So there's a lot of, as I tell people, a lot of transportation monies that are being, looked at and involved in that. And it's not pretty, because I mean, I'm literally watching LaGuardia and all the flights and stuff get canceled in real time, or layovers that are getting shut in real time, because it stops the transportation and ingress of people being able to move. So it has a lot of risk that's involved, and a lot of liability that's involved, because people buy travelers insurance now.
Insurance for everything.
Yeah, especially if you go on cruise ships.
Yeah.
Well, it probably relieved the American travel industry a bit. I mean, not just like the government's not shut down anymore, but I'm going to play the cheeky Canadian here. This has nothing to do with cybersecurity, so I apologize for this tangent, but it appears that the American tourism industry has so far lost several $billion from Canadian tourists who would have otherwise gone this year.
Yeah. It's
Yep.
what I call the snowbird effect. They go to like Florida.
Well,
Yeah,
Vegas is taking a big hit too, right?
Oh yeah.
very bad for Florida's economy that Canadians don't want to go there anymore.
And I live in the
That's okay.
South.
All the New Yorkers are moving down there, so
Yeah, I live in the South, so for me, it's weird getting, cold weather. We got a cold weather snap, and it's kind of like, wow, it went from like 70 degrees down to the lower 20s at night. And it's been kind of like, this is kind of odd for us, this time of year. But then it's like, I tell people, it's like it'll be 70 degrees by this weekend. So it's like, it was like, it was a fluke. Yeah.
Do you have
we had
heating in your
we
house?
had 8 inches of snow in New Orleans so last year, so that was
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, and the weather's getting odd. It's kind of like, one year it's like mega, mega hot, and then, it's getting mega, mega cold really quick, and it's climate change, no matter which side you look on, it's like, yeah, things are getting a little odd, especially because, for us in the South, it's the tornado season. That's the scary stuff. That's when we kind of get,
Apropos of nothing, there are certain kinds of data centers that are significantly contributing to our worsening climate disaster. And now you're getting snow in New Orleans. So,
Well, G4 magnetic storm right now going on. Everybody's, oh, pretty northern lights, and I'm like, yeah, that shouldn't be happening. It's like, that's not good.
Now, why are the telephones sparking? The telephone poles sparking. That'll be interesting to watch because that happened in the
Yep.
1800s when we had a huge solar flare. That was literally causing the lines to catch on fire. I'm sitting there going, "Wow, we're getting the northern lights, towards Tennessee, Mississippi, and Alabama. That's not natural. We're not used. Us Southerners are not used to having the lights on at night. I mean, that's just something that we just kind of like. That's
Yeah, we're
kind of
one
kind
we're
of
one
odd
below
here.
we're one below extreme right now. So I don't know if you want to blame it on Atlas. You were talking about Atlas AI or whatever it was. That comment that's going through. If you want to blame it on that or not, but it is interesting.
So let
We're
me
we're
ask you the
we're on 4 out of 5 right now.
Yeah, so let me ask you the question. What do you think of the new AI automated risk management programs and stuff that's going out there? Because, okay, I look at it like this. It's a good tool to use, but there's no human in the loop. So don't put all your eggs in one basket there, kids, because, we've been, talking
I'm
about
looking at the actual data, and not only is the bubble due to burst because it's completely financially unsustainable and a great big Ponzi scheme going on between OpenAI and NVIDIA and whatnot, that is going to crash the economy very horribly, very, very soon. But MIT research shows it's completely environmentally unsustainable. The power grid cannot sustain it.
oh, yeah,
And just to give like bullshit output to and now I'm giving you that bullshit most of the time. Do
Well,
we
that's
want to kill the
I think
planet for this?
I,
Do we
I
want
think
to destroy
no
the
no
power
that this is
grid?
where this is where the shift is happening, right? Just like everything else, and we saw this. Anybody that went through the mainframe to PC revolution, anybody that went from the you know PC to internet or dial up to internet. What were we on? CompuServe and
yeah. We're on
what was the
CompuServe, and
what's the other one? Prodigy,
Prodigy was out there, and
America Online. So so
Line.
so so what's happening actually came up in your neck of the woods. There's a lot of work going on outside of Saskatoon and in Winnipeg,
Yeah,
working on. I think it's primarily with Westinghouse, but it is around these small portable nuclear reactors. So they are looking. They know. I mean, they're not going to risk, right? Anybody that's put these billions of dollars into these technologies is not going to risk not having the ability to continue doing
right.
this.
And
The
that's
the
not
other trend, yeah, the other trend that's evolving here is we're getting into the second and third generation of the modeling. So literally, my neighbor here in New Orleans, they actually built their semantic engine, and I got to be careful what I'm allowed to talk to here, but a lot of the engines that were built out there were based on extremely unstructured data. It pretty much just crawled the internet and pulled it in. Well,
Yeah,
they've
they were
found
meta
some,
crawlers.
yeah. So they found some other data sets that are more structured and tagged up more effectively than traditional HTML. So they are using that as so. I think we saw the novelty of the large language models really, got everybody, wow, this is cool, and look what I can ask it, and yeah, it hallucinates every now and then, but the shift now really is to, for lack of a better term, and I think this is starting to make it into the lingo, but it's small language models. So the models I'm using for the GRC AI work that I'm doing now are based on very discrete training sets. It doesn't use the full, internet. I don't use LLMs. It's a purpose-built GRC small language model tied into those data sets, whether it's a regulation, whether it's a framework. It has extensions into LLM so that it can go grab maybe some semantic things, but not for the core set. So that's changing a couple things. It reduces the token consumption and improves the efficiency, improves the response. But if anybody's doing it without human in the loop, to Kim's point, big mistake, right? So
Yeah,
you have to
huge.
treat when I talk to people about risk management about AIs, and Josh Copeland was did a good talk on this back at the Southwest Louisiana conference here recently, and he and I were both talking like a lot of people that were out in the audience. You have to treat those AI agents or those AI tools almost like another employee, and you need to in a business process, and what data are they handling, and should they be handling it, where does that fit in a process flow, so that helps you to start to understand the risk that AI component brings into the organization. And then the other piece of it, it's an employee, but I used to tell people, like, somebody said they treat it like a dog fetching toys. I treat it like a very, very smart 5-year-old intern that will get me everything I want and bring it back. And I still have to say, nope, that's not quite right. So, context is everything with these things. Making sure, that you're giving prompts that tie, or language models that tie back to what you're actually asking. I did, when I very first got into this stuff, being a former data scientist, I was like, all right, I got to test the bias on these things. And it may have been ChatGPT 1.0 or whatever the first public one was. So I want to test the bias. So I said, who is Ben Franklin, right? And a few folks have heard me tell this story before, but I expected to see, hey, it's going to weigh some things towards like the 1619 project version of, he was a slave owner and did these other things. And then here's the thing you may read in an American textbook, traditionally, found electricity, a printing press, these types of things. And it did a pretty good job. Both of those things were in the response. But on the third page, it popped up and it said, oh, and he owned a bunch of retail stores. And I was like, oh, I had my first hallucination. My very first question, it's hallucination. And I called my brother up and he says, well, do you remember when we lived in Hawaii, there was a store called Ben Franklin? I was like, you know what? You're right. You go out and Google it. And there was a set of stores for quite some time, called Ben Franklin's. That actually, I think it did start out of Boston actually. But the lesson there is the context, right? I just said, who is Ben Franklin? That's terrible context, right? I should have said, who is Ben Franklin? Because there are lots of Ben Franklin's historical figure that lived between this period, so the more context you give it, and then it tightens up the model response and reduces that possibility for hallucination. So that's one thing is how you're designing agents and designing prompts. And then the other side of this really is, you really need to know, Kim, back to your point, what are those training sets? Where is it getting its information? Because it will tend to go off the roadmap, and you're gonna have to have that human in the loop. And you always have to have a human in the loop reviewing this stuff, because that's where the litigation is going to come from.
You're familiar with Dr. Nicholas Weaver, right?
I am not.
Oh, you're not?
You're not?
He has had a doctorate in network security for over 20 years now. And he's been lecturing at a lot of like University of California schools, especially Berkeley. And I was interviewing him for my own blog earlier this week. And I'm just going to quote him. So this is what Nicholas Weaver says. So I was asking him about the term AI and how people use the term AI and how people get confused about it. And his response was, what I use is the following heuristic. If someone talks about machine learning, they know what they're talking about. These are machine learning systems. And I found it hilarious that people say Apple is behind the curve on AI because they're leading the machine learning revolution for a decade, blah, blah, blah. If someone talks about AI or generative AI, put up your guard. It could be a machine learning person who knows that because of the hype you call AI, or it could be a bullshit artist. If someone talks about AGI, they are a fraud or a scammer, and you can yeet them into the sun. That's what he said.
Yeah, the generative is a little bit different. Those are the generative transformers that are heavily linguistic and kind of the next version of natural language processing. So you're 100% right. And we run an AI council in our organization, and so everybody now, this is the problem. Everybody says, oh, my tool has AI. It was like, well, what is it? Is it a generative transform? Is it machine learning? Is it neural network? Is it just natural language processing? What? Tell me. So we have to go back to these vendors and constantly, because we want to ultimately know if they're going to try to leverage our data as a training set, and if how, and where all those boundaries are. So that's a big part of it. People always laugh there because these things seem human-like, right? And you can ask them these questions. They all get frustrated. Oh, what? It did terrible math. It's like, well, it's a language model. It's not meant to do math.
Model. Yeah, it's not a. It's not meant to do algebra and geometry there for you.
Yeah,
kids,
ask your liberal arts student to go do massive calculus or something, right?
They're probably doing it for their shareholders, but there are a ton of vendors whose products they said they would call the feature machine learning, like Seams and IDSs and whatnot several years ago. And now instead of calling it machine learning, they're just calling it AI for the sake of their shareholders.
That's the marketing. That's the marketing people, behavioral analytics and the pattern recognition decision tree. So he's 100% right that you can't, when you're looking at these tools relative to your organization and the risk they pose, you have to ask that second level of question, Kim. It's like, well, what is it? And the AGI is really, that's where, that's the singularity and Skynet and Lord knows what happens. And that is really, that's the challenge. I don't think any of us can predict what will happen. Should one of these things finally become sentient.
Sentient.
Yeah, and that's a challenge. I do a lot of research around the work Ray Kurzweil has done around trying to predict when that will happen. And if you want a really spooky book, read Singularity is Near. He wrote back in 2007. I think he updated it just shortly around COVID, so maybe 2020, called The Singularity is Near, and it will explain kind of how the transformers, the generative transformers work and why they seem so mystical to us. But then he still does, like, we haven't talked about nanobots in a long time. We haven't talked about these other things that are going on around biological engineering. And so when you read The Singularity is Near, he even says, I was off by potentially 5 years. And, when I was 2007 and my 7-year-old daughter, like 2030 seemed a million miles away. And here we sit at 2025, and this is all very close. So
a decade ago, they were also saying that self-driving cars would be the norm.
Yeah, that's true.
I've been in a couple. I define normal.
I have been in them, and it feels weird. When I was in Los Angeles, I was kind of going, okay, I'm going to try this. And I told my wife, if I get killed, please sue, because I was like,
Did you sit in the front seat or the back seat?
I sat in the back seat, because I had a bunch of equipment and stuff with me. So
I sat in the front seat because I wanted to test it. And I was at RSA, and I started grabbing the steering wheel to see what it would do. It immediately pulled over and stopped the ride. I was like, oh, well, I won't be doing that again. I may have been blacklisted.
As I've said it on the show before, artificial intelligence to me is, basically a 5-year-old with an Uzi. It's cool but dangerous. And it can do some nice stuff, but you got to have a human in the loop. And then on top of that, we're dealing with AI is what you put into it is what you get out of it, right? So if you put a bunch of whole racist bullshit into it, you're going to get a racist bullshit answer.
I go with 5-year-old with a lawnmower, right? They can mow the grass pretty good, but if they run over a pet or like yourself or something,
that might be bad.
That could be
or your foot, that'd be horrible. But and I say that as, it's a 5-year-old with an Uzi, but I mean, and I've also said this about AI is, I coined the term centralized artificial intelligence, to where you're just taking a data set built around one single thing, and your large language model is narrowed down to a specific content and context, right? So when DARPA jumped on the bandwagon and said, oh, cool, go with it, run with it, let's see what you come up with. It worked relatively well. It started off clunky, and then eventually it got streamlined, So it starts off with like the Model A car, the Henry Ford, Model A or the Model T, and then eventually it became a Ferrari, and eventually it became a Lamborghini, and it went really fast, or a Bugatti, whatever car you choose. It became really fast, really sleek, really quick, and it didn't take that many generations for it to precipitate into something better than what it originally was. So I agree with you. It's like, oh, we started off with this model, and it was horrible, right? And now we're getting down to a more refined idea model, and that's just the innovation of time. As I've told people, it's always the innovation of time.
Yeah.
And it takes a long time for sometimes these things to do. But now that we've basically cracked what I call the hardware problem, we can now have quadrubits, working on this, in tandem, and start wrapping these things, up very quickly, especially when you're dealing like, I'm a huge fan of, protein folding, so I do folding at home. I've got a computer sitting right over here. It's been sitting here for 5 years. All it does is
learning. That's machine learning.
Machine learning, and it helps out, the CDC, the NIH, and these, Emory universities and stuff to figure out, like, how do we look at the common cold? AIDS, malaria, dengue fever. I've got it running all this stuff over here. But when I started writing my
It's the
first,
new version of the SETI
yeah, it's the new version of
network.
SETI, but we're working on viruses, which could cure AIDS, cancer, stuff like that. So, I told this to the CDC and the NIH. I said, why don't you guys just ring your little federal bell one good time and wrangle in every bit of cancer research done since the 1930s? All of it from every university, everybody. St. Jude, doesn't matter who it is, National Cancer Institution, whatnot. Take all of that, and y'all have got this really kick ass supercomputer that's there at the NIH and the CDC, and build just an AI language model just to find the cure for cancer right then and there. So take all the terabits of information that you've got, right? Take one rack server and then all those NVIDIA cards that you got over there, and crank away on this one problem. That's it. Just one single thing, because now you've got everything that's historically ever built into your LLM, right? And the machine's going to take some time to learn it. It's just going to take a little bit of time. But when you're dealing with Blackwell processors that are doing quadribits of information at a time, that are all hyper-threaded together, that are using all of your video cards for the 3D modeling and the modeling of the structure for this, I guarantee you could have a cure for cancer relatively quick if you wanted a cure for cancer relatively quick, which that's where you put on the tinfoil hat going, well, it's easier to treat. All these companies would lose money because they were for the treatment of cancer versus the cure for cancer. And then you get to decide who's God. Because guess what? Whoever has the cure for that decides the fate of the world, right? Is it going to be a company? Is it going to be a university? How are we going to charge for this?
Well, and that's
You know?
you're onto some of the things Ray talks about beyond just
Yeah,
cybersecurity and AI. These are the biological implications.
right.
There's a lot of technology moving far faster than I think
We
even
ever
has
thought. Yeah.
forecasted. Yep.
And the same thing is the energy crisis that we're approaching here. Kim, alluded to this is, that we don't have enough energy to power these data centers. Hell, the state of Texas is about to melt. If they have another cold storm, they come through and have an ice storm or anything like that, you're talking people that are going to, I mean, they say 200 people died, but guess what? There's going to probably be more people, that die, the next cold snap that comes across, the United States really, really deep into the South and so forth that suffer that. It's going to be, how do we solve the problem of cold fusion? People have been cranking away on that for 30 fucking years. It's like, wow, we now have the AI data center power and stuff to be able to put the quantum. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. We could take all that and probably solve some of these generative problems that we have in nature, some of these problems that we have in the healthcare industry, some of these things that could create really cool materials by design or pharmaceuticals by design, So why the fuck are we not doing that? Well, we're more interested in using it for stupidity problems. That's what I call it. We're using it for really stupid shit, where we could be using it for really cool shit, and it's getting better, and it's like, and who I really think that could benefit from more than this? Not NASA, not anybody, but oceanography. There's a lot of crap down there on the ocean floor that we don't know about. And there's a lot of nuclear missiles that we've lost, or countries have lost over the years, that are sitting there on the ocean floor just rotting away and rusting out. And I'm like, yeah, one little drop of salt water on that nuclear bomb, boom, hits that uranium, it's over with. So, it's like, let's go recover some of that first off the bed of the floor, some of the nuclear waste we've dumped down there over years, so we don't have like, five-legged, fish that start walking, and talking to us in the
That's
water.
the biggest problem with nuclear power, in my opinion,
Yeah.
is what happens to the uranium rods that get
Yeah.
stored.
Well, we got Yucca Mountain, but we've seen, what happened with Fukushima. I mean, if you look at what NOAA and NOLA have reported, especially for us to deal in the waterways, there was a lot of heavy water that got released into the oceans that have now caused some major problems, and hopefully we're going to be able to start fixing some of these things. So we can fix some environmental issues, we can fix material issues, some a lot of this stuff, around that are what I call considered to be basic human problems that that have been put out there that for generations it seems like that we've been trying to tackle and solve. Now we have the infrastructure, now we have some of the power, and now we have the computing power to address these things. why are we really not doing that, in our industry? Why, like we could solve the problems of password issues if we wanted to, we could solve problems with cancer if we wanted to, AIDS if we wanted to. So, some of these things are life and systemic. So I tell people, guess what? Now's a perfect time to be in, learning about information technology. Now is a great time to be, in, universities and start asking these questions of people that hold power, that are supposed power, over people. Speak truth to it. Then on top of that, though, too, is there's a lot of humanity to put into that. It's like, well, what is your cause? Are you in this for the money? Because guess what? Ooh, that gets dangerous, So you know, you better be doing this for the love of the technology, the love and the passion for it, especially if you're getting into
Once again, our producers are doing the whole vaudeville
thing.
So
at
one last plug. New Orleans B-Sides is set for May of next year. Watch LinkedIn. We're gonna have call for papers, sponsors. We're expanding with an ICS village. We're expanding the villages even further this year. So visit us, New Orleans. Watch out for the call for papers, and love to have everybody down.
I would love to come, but they don't let me out of the house much. So yeah, it is what it is. But thank you so very much, sir, for coming to our show today. We love the conversations that we've had. Thank you to Secure Nation for our sponsorship, for them loving us so much. We love you guys. And
see you later.